Once again, good morning, and for those of you that I have not had a chance to meet, my name is Rick White, and I have had the pleasure of serving as the chair for ASNE Day for the last year. Welcome back to day 2. If you were here yesterday morning, you heard me comment that prudent planning was the name of the game for yesterday. We had a very packed agenda, and I will also tell you that today's agenda is equally packed. If you don't pay attention to the agenda, you will go away this afternoon saying, I wish I should have, could have. Please don't do that to yourself. We have a day that's packed with an excellent keynote address. We have a PEO panel. The Young Professionals track is continuing. We have the ever-loved point-counterpoint session. We have a NASA session this afternoon. And we will finish the symposium with a Ohio replacement panel with Admiral Jabley, his staff, and Admiral retired Fireball. So please try to stay around for the day. If you were here last night, the food was outstanding. Our award winners I was duly impressed. It was eye-watering, the sacrifices and the efforts that our award winners last night, from students to 50-year members of ASNE. It was a history lesson. So if you missed it, please look at your programs to check it out, and hopefully you'll come next year. Thanks to General Atomics for the breakfast this morning. It's great. And I now have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker. Admiral Richardson is a graduate from the Naval Academy. He holds degrees from MIT, Woods Hole, National Security Strategy from the National War College. He has had numerous operational and staff commands, served as naval reactors, and we're all thrilled that he could take some time out of his schedule to come in and speak with us. He's going to give a speech. I think we have some time for questions at the end, and we'll be watching the counter. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Richardson.
Well, thank you very much, Captain White. It's great to be here this morning. Yesterday was the action-packed, filled substance day. This morning, I am just the eye candy, okay? This is all going to be fluff. They said, as Secretary Stackley got here, and he was, he gave it to, as he always does. What a terrific guy, just, right to the substance. I'm all about form. So, hey, how many people in here fancy themselves to be, a no-kidding engineer? Raise your hand if you, okay. I would actually expect to see more hands go up at this conference. So anyway, I guess everybody else is just kind of wants to be around engineering, which is a great thing too. It was interesting. How many people in here would fancy themselves to be a young engineer? All right, yeah. Now, there you go. Thank you, sir. All right. And it's fun. It's interesting as I was walking around, particularly as naval reactors. We visited a lot of shipyards, a lot of places where they did a lot of engineering, labs, et cetera. Any NR folks in here? I don't think they're allowed to come. And you would find these young engineers, and there was this constant tension or kind of a constant theme that we need to get these young engineers out, to the job site, basically, right? So they can get down there, they can get engaged, get their hands dirty, and start, learning about what they are actually doing, rather than just kind of doing the engineering paperwork. And so, I always thought when I was interviewing candidates, the folks, I would ask them kind of what they do, what they're up to, what do they like to do, and the people that rebuilt their cars, and the people that built hardware, put together computers and robots and all that stuff, I thought had a terrific leg up on, folks that just had sort of this academic approach to engineering. It's always been to me kind of a, let's get our sleeves rolled up. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I'd encourage you all to join me. If you're an engineer, let's just take a moment. I'm going to take my jacket off, and I'm going to roll my sleeves up. And then we're going to get going here. So any true engineer, jackets off, sleeves up. There you go. Okay, if you got your jacket on still, please leave. All right. Okay? All right, so here we go. Many of you may be aware that I've recently rolled out, and I was just the one to roll it out. This is the Navy's design for maintaining maritime superiority. And we've had a lot of buy-in and a lot of excitement as we've rolled it out. And I just wanted to walk you through it and give you some of the logic. And there'll be an engineering theme that we'll take a detour, if you will, and sort of dwell on some of the engineering aspects of this. And so let me see if I can get going here. Okay, that works. So what the design talks through is how we are going to win the contest for maritime superiority. And the key to this phrase right now is contest. And so this is something I think is pervasive through every part of the Navy, and particularly here in engineering. For the first time in 25 years, there is a contest. You know, the game is on. The game is afoot. And the margins for winning this contest, for reasons that we'll highlight later, are absolutely razor thin. And if we are not grasping for every inch all the time, we are going to fall behind. We're going to certainly fall behind our potential, and worse than that, we could fall behind our competitors. And so this idea of a contest, this sense of urgency is what I want to instill in you this morning. Okay, and normally when you talk about a contest, it's easy to talk about the teams that are involved, right? And we do that all the time. And I'll take questions, and we'll discuss a little bit about that. But more than the teams right now, I think we need to stop and consider the change in the character of the game. Right? The rule set and the pace particularly have changed fundamentally, so that not only are we dealing with new teams, but we're dealing with these teams that are operating at a game that is fundamentally different than the one that maybe some of us who are not young engineers grew up with. Okay, and that's what I want to talk about this morning. Okay, a little bit of a busy slide. I don't know if we can turn the lights down, but we're going to talk about sort of three forces that are acting in our environment right now that shape this game. One is the maritime system, and if you look at that, we've highlighted on the slide the trade routes, right, the sea lanes. And if you look at that, much of that has not changed since man first put to sea thousands of years ago, maybe the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal. But the choke points are pretty classic, and even though if you look on a political map or a map, the whole ocean looks blue, it looks pretty uniform. In fact, it's not uniform, right? There's structure to that. And that structure, those nodes, those choke points, those sea lanes give rise to opportunities and vulnerabilities, all of which can be exploited. So, they're saying, hey, what's changed about that? That looks pretty much like a map I could have drawn, 50 years ago easily. Well, I'll tell you, since the wall went down, let's say 1990, okay, just as a rough date, the traffic on the maritime system has increased by a factor of 4, okay? And so even though this system has been in place, it's accelerating tremendously right now. And this fourfold increase is driving and fueling, the growth in global domestic product and is outpacing it. So GDP went up by about 80% in the same period of time, maritime traffic by a factor of 4, all right? So increasingly used maritime system. And it's not just the traffic over the oceans, it is also that which lies on the ocean floor. And for a number of reasons, the Arctic ice receding is making continental shelves accessible that were not accessible before. And technology is making vast parts of the ocean floor accessible that were also unreachable not too long ago. And so you see here, see if I can get the laser to work, all these little green dots are indicative of mineral deposits that are all accessible now. The amount of exploration and the amount of natural gas and oil that is going to be taken from the ocean floor is expected to grow by 50% in the next 15 years. The sea lane over the top of Europe here, in that same amount of time, that's going to be open for transit and for about twice as much as it is today, right, because of this receding ice. So there's a great deal of change, excuse me, that's going on in what one consider a classic maritime system. Even there, things are accelerating. Part of that infrastructure that lies on the ocean are those sea cables, those transoceanic cables. There's been a lot of talk about those lately. The internet traffic that travels from the United States to Europe and overseas, the 99% of that traffic goes over these cables, right? So the transoceanic information rides on these cables, almost all of it. And that traffic can't be reconstituted. And so this is also a nice segue to the next system, right? So this idea of the maritime system is changing in fundamental ways very quickly right now. Last 25 years, the character has changed. These cables allow me to segue to the next system, which is the information system. Okay, another global system that has changed the way we do everything, and that includes the business that we do at sea. And just because it's engineers, I'm going to show you I haven't lost all of my engineering and throw some numbers out here. The cost of entry into the engineering, this information system, is just astonishingly low right now, right? Almost anybody with a laptop is a full-on player, and in this system, things are changing super rapidly. So when Tom Eccles and I were department heads, it was 1 gigabyte of memory, which was all you could get at that time, was about $625 per gigabyte, okay? And, today, that gigabyte costs about a nickel, and, who's got the gigabyte hard drive out there? Yeah, nobody. I mean, we're looking at, terabytes at the minimum. It was interesting when I was at Devron. I'm sorry, I got a splinter from the podium here. So I'm a little distracted as I bleed all over my speech up here. But when I was at the Submarine Development Squadron 12, we gave this conference, hosted a conference of kind of human-machine interface, and we were talking about this thing, and I walked in, and I was, it was kind of a technical conference, cutting edge, we were hoping. And when I walked in, first I was the youngest guy in the room, so I was in trouble right away. And we talked about this idea, it was the Submarine Development Squadron, and we talked about this idea that, hey, let's just, store everything that we sense from the submarine, all the submarine sensors, the acoustic sensors, et cetera. And, on the back watch, on the mid watch or something, when things aren't particularly active, we could go through that data and just, run filtering on it, right? Do detection and estimation on this data and see what we find. Maybe we find some deeper signals that you don't do with some of the more tactical types of estimation work that you do. And, somebody raised their hand and said, Admiral, or Commodore, that's nuts, that's gonna take like a terabyte to store all that. And, I was armed with just a PC magazine that was already selling terabyte, hard drives in the back. And so, in terms of thinking ahead in this world, it's getting harder and harder. The cell phone, the smartphones that we carry around in our pockets right now are, orders of magnitude more computing power than we use to land on the moon. 90% of the data that exists in the world right now was created in the last 2 years, to give you a sense of kind of the exponential pace at which things are moving. And the links here continue to multiply. The first server, that came online in 93. Last year, 2.7 million servers shipped around the world. So you can sense, if you're not kind of feeling yourself set back in your chair by the acceleration, then we need to go get you another cup of coffee, okay? And then there's, let me just see if I can go back. So again, you log onto your computer, and the entire internet is available to you. It seems just like that map of the ocean. It seems it's all blue, it's all accessible, it's all there for you. But in fact, even in the information system, there are nodes, there are channels, there are pathways that can be exploited, right? Those are opportunities and vulnerabilities. Similarly here, right? A big part of the information system rides on satellites. This is a picture of kind of the satellite density around the Earth, and you can see their structure. Some orbits are better than others. And so all of that can be exploited as well. So we've talked about two forces that are driving acceleration in the maritime domain, forces in the information domain. These global systems, of course they're going to be under increasing stress as the world becomes more globalized. The third system, the third force, is just talks about the rate of technology introduction. And I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but it's coming at us at an astonishing rate. Okay, and it's not just Moore's Law stuff. Here is a curve that describes the introduction of patents, the number of US patents. Okay, and you can see kind of that exponential shape there towards the end. And we'll pan through a couple of others. Basically the capacity of manufacturing. Okay, and a third one will come as no surprise. This is the number of internet hosts. Okay, and so all of these technologies coming at us very, very quickly and picking up speed. And it's not just information technologies. These things enable genetic technologies, 3D manufacturing, artificial intelligence, some real fundamental game changers that, again, we've got to think ahead on, or we're just going to be left wondering what is going on. And it's not just the fact that it's being introduced and invented. It's becoming adopted by people at a faster rate as well. And so, if you go back to when Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, it took 35 years for 25% of Americans to adopt and get a telephone, okay? And you can see just from this chart, things have picked up. And so, it took about 7 years for 25% of America to get on the internet, and it took, when the smartphone came out, within 4 years, 25% of Americans had a smartphone. So this technology is coming at us faster and faster, and is being adopted by society, being used faster and faster as well. So look forward just a little bit. Here's that Google car. It's kind of become an iconic example almost. What is an icon today? I don't, most of the music I listen to is classic rock now, so I don't know what this means. But this Google car, in 2004, when DARPA issued a grand challenge, not a single robotic car was offered. 2004. So, they thought it couldn't be done. And here we are now, this car is driven probably over 1.5 million miles right now. It's had remarkably few accidents, and those accidents were caused by the people running into the Google car, right? And the cameras from this Google car have just revealed, remarkable things about driving, right? There was one video clip that showed somebody practicing their trumpet while driving, all right? And so, you wonder, I'm a cyclist, and people working on those machines, texting and everything else, I don't ride on the road anymore. It's just become too dangerous, right? I'd much rather be riding on a highway full of Google cars. It'd be a much safer thing than it is with people practicing their trumpet and shaving and texting, right? Okay, but something that wasn't even conceivable in 2004, now 1.5 million miles under its belt. Okay, so this idea of the character of the game is, I think, an important thing for us to assimilate, in this room in particular, because you are the ones that are driving a lot of that change. I hope you're driving it, right? I hope we're driving it and not lagging it. And, during the question period, I'm sure I'll take a few about the bureaucratic overhead that's required to get through for you to do your job, okay? I should have told you at the start, too. I've got about an hour and a half of material, and then we'll break for questions. So hang with me. I'll try and pick it up. Okay, I talked about the character of the game, and I told you I'd talk about teams, and this is just to set the context. This is a competition, and there are more players in it than just us. And so, in one group, I would say that you've got the global powers. We have returned to great power competition, and these are our competitors in great power, in the great power category, if you will. And we could talk about what defines a great power, but I think most of us would agree that the United States and these two countries would be in there. Another group of threats would be this group. And, you're tempted to call them regional rather than great powers. But nothing's regional anymore, right? By virtue of some of those technologies, virtually everything is trans-regional, if not global. And so can't call them regional anymore, but they're certainly not great. Very, very challenging. And then there is this pervasive global counterterrorism fight that has proven to be very resilient, very adaptive, and very persistent, and continues to challenge us today. And so new actors, right? If I gave this talk 5 years ago, some of these folks would not have been on there. Russia and ISIL would not have been in that, in the list of competitors, and many lists, okay? So the teams have changed as well. Overall, things getting faster, more challenging, and you all know that our resource situation is relatively flat, and so there's this widening gap that we have to address. Okay, so let's bring it all together, right? We've got the character of the game, information technology, technologies in the maritime system enabled by information, and you've got these actors, these competitors, and let's see if we can sort of get a picture of how this all might come together. So let's go back to the classic maritime, sea lanes, choke points, and stuff, and I will put what I would call a classic, like classic rock, coastal defense cruise missile radius, okay? And so each one of these little yellow circles is kind of a classic cruise missile radius. If you're going to defend that choke point with a missile battery, that might be, the area of influence that you would have. Let's forward now to today's technology, where all of this has enabled us to target and hit targets with great precision at great range, and that circles look more like that. And when you look at that, you start to understand why words like anti-access come about. I'm not a huge fan of that term, but I can certainly understand why someone would think that if you can take a look at that slide, okay? I mean, the entire South China Sea, the Mediterranean, about 25% or so of the world's trade goes through the Mediterranean, 30% through the South China Sea. so you can start to see why people are concerned. Okay? So how are we going to fight this? How are we going to keep up? I'm a big fan that even in this context, if you want to get a new idea, read an old book. And so I'm just going to kind of go back to my naval reactors library and talk about an extremely optimistic and fast-moving time in our not-so-distant past. And we'll talk about atomic power, nuclear power. Fission discovered in 1938, just conceptual idea. And here is the atomic pile underneath the stadium in Chicago that Fermi used in 1942 to actually do the first controlled fission, right? Brought that pile critical. I think that guy is the Axeman, right? So he's looking pretty happy. Okay, fast forward, not too much from there. So think about this date, 1942, the first, experimental achievement of criticality, okay? And in 1955, 13 years later, we had taken that, we had moved forward from that atomic pile in Chicago, had harnessed that into a propulsion plant, had put that into a submarine, and had launched a submarine that broke every submarine record on the books. 13 years. Okay? Amazing. And it didn't stop there. Okay? In the meantime, in 1955, we were already building the next generation of nuclear-powered warships, right? Enterprise was already on the books and started. And the next generation of submarines, including ballistic missile submarines. And, again, an amazingly optimistic approach. When we decided that we could saw an attack submarine in half and put this missile compartment in the middle, we didn't have the missile built. We didn't have the warfare system built. We didn't have the warhead or any of that built. We just said, but you know what? We said we can do this. And there were a couple of really visionary people, Rayburn, Rickover, Arleigh Burke, who said, we're just going to make this happen. This is kind of the Navy version of, within this decade, we will land on the moon, okay? And it drove so much, right? It was not only nuclear power and propulsion and missile systems, but because that technology drove us undersea, you had disciplines like oceanography, underwater acoustics, navigation, inertial navigation, missile systems, rocket technology. All of these things, flourished by virtue of this revolution, okay? And so you got to see, this revolution in a very short period of time, from 1942, 18 years later, you were launching Polaris. Think about that in the context of today's acquisition systems, okay? Maybe we can get the paperwork together in 18 years. All right. There are other terrific examples. The F-117, all right? 5 years from contact to delivery. That's pretty remarkable. 5 years. 1978 was the contract, and this thing delivered in 1983. Okay? First test flight was even sooner than that, 1981. So it can be done. We can do this. It can also be done wrong. And we have to be cautious of this. This is one of my favorite examples. If you've heard me talk a couple times, this is the Bolo. I think it's the B-18, Bolo. Okay? Anybody heard of the B-18 before? Yeah, some folks. Okay? It was an aircraft. Douglas produced it, and it was adapted from the DC-2 and designed in 1934, kind of, right when we were in the Depression. We were competing against other designs like, we do now. And it won the design. It won, what do you think was the driving factor? Cost, exactly. That was kind of half of the competition was weighted towards cost. Went into production, went to operational units, and when Pearl Harbor happened on December 7th, 1941, it was the most numerous bomber in the inventory, okay? And then the war broke out, and it's time to get this thing and employ it. And they found at that point it had a few shortcomings, just a couple. It had small range, it had slow speed, it had a wimpy payload, had no defensive armor, and it had no offensive armament. Just a couple of shortcomings, right? And so what did we do? Well, we had to go back to the B-17, right? And we built a bunch of these, okay? So remember what they called this plane? Flying Fortress, right? What would you rather ride to war in, the Flying Fortress or the Bolo? Right? And then, of course, we went forward with the B-24, and we got back on track. But, so we can optimize to the wrong criteria if we're not careful, right? So when you think about some of the systems that we have in play right now, we've got to be careful that we build something that can be used, and we don't build the next version of the Bolo, but we're just going to have to recall it. We don't have the time to do that these days, right? We just don't have the time to get it right. And it's easy to sort of look back and say those guys were real knuckleheads. They were pretty smart people. They were trying to do the best that they could. They had a lot of the same dynamics going on that we have, okay? All right, here's one, and I use this example with caution. And I would say that it's a mixed story. It is certainly one of the most highly awarded and remarkable programs, and I'm talking about Aegis, right? And Wayne Myers, the father of Aegis, shepherded this project through. 1985 won the ASNE Lifetime Achievement Award, I think, for his time, work on Aegis. And Aegis, it was a game-changing system, right? And I think Mr. Myers' catchphrase was build a little, test a little, learn a lot. Okay, and that's awesome. I love that catchphrase. But it took 16 years to get this thing kind of up and running. And so while there's a lot that was good about that system, and it remains good, right? We still use this system. And baseline 9 of this system and moving into even higher AMDR types of radars is remarkable. That is kind of the 5th generation of combat systems and radars. We don't have 16 years these days to get this done. And so, I hope we're feeling this sense of urgency come into the room. Okay? All right, let's go forward here. Okay, I'm getting now to the lecturing part. Afraid I just can't help myself. One aspect of the design for maintaining maritime superiority is this idea of high-velocity learning. And I would say that, if I have to do an honest self-assessment, this is the least understood of the 4 lines of effort, right? So we've got a line of effort that talks to maintaining the right people, and nowhere, very, very important for this team in engineering to recruit the right people, right? To recruit that high-level talent. And the competition for that talent is just intense right now. So how do we bring them into, and onto our Navy team? So there's a whole line of effort that talks to doing right by our people. And as you know, everything begins and ends with our people. So we got to make sure we keep them front and center. There's a line of effort that talks to our partnerships. And one that I wanted to highlight in this group is it's kind of a classic, when you say partnerships, you think international partnerships, but there's also partnerships with academia. There's partnerships with industry. There's partnerships with other labs. And so I want to work together with ASNE and other groups to make sure that we're taking full advantage of all those partnerships, that we've lowered the obstacles to communicating and sharing information to the greatest extent possible, that we've enabled our labs to be as competitive places to work as anywhere else. And so I need to hear from you about what are those obstacles? How can I help you bring those down, right? So help me out there with the partnerships line of effort. Third line of effort is operations and warfighting. Okay, we're back out into sea control types of missions, and so we've got to sharpen our skills in high-end competition and conflict at sea, warfighting at sea. And with all of those technologies that we talked about at the beginning of the talk, how do we go and get about that? That's an entire line of effort. And then there is this fourth line of effort where we talk about high-velocity learning. And as we talk about it, I just get the sense, that everybody's on board with it. We're not getting any, denial. But I get this sense that there's a whole bunch of people out there kind of waiting for their high-velocity learning kit to arrive at the mail room of their commands. It's like, okay, I'll tear this thing open. It has a big smiley face on it or something, and I'll get out that kit, and then I'll start learning. Or the other model in people's heads, I sense, is that, hey, there are parts of our business that learn, and I guess this is over to them, right? So, I'm not a learner, okay? So, 85% of this high-velocity learning it must happen right in our shops, right in everything that we do. It is self-teaching is really what it is, high-velocity self-teaching. And so I feel very comfortable stepping through the next few slides quickly because nobody should understand the scientific method better than this team, okay? And so, that's what we've got here, kind of an operational version of the scientific method, where we're going to do our very best. What's going on my laser here? We'll start by defining the problem. What are we getting after? We're going to have to get after that problem in an environment, and we're going to take some time to predict that environment. It's a very complicated environment, right? And so we're going to, at some point, we got to just put pencils down and say, this is as good as we can get right now. It's good. It's all we're going to do. We're not an academic institution. We're an institution of action. And so we'll do the best prediction that we can do, and then we've got to formulate a plan, okay? The next part's the most important part, I think, is that when we formulate a plan, we've got to predict a result, right? What is our expected result? And all you scientists and engineers, you know about this, right? You go and put together a test plan, and you've got an expected result of that plan, and then you run it, and you see what you get, right? Operationally, we need to improve here. In many, many areas around our business, we need to improve. In fact, I'd encourage you to apply this model in almost everything that you do, right? What is your expected result? Safety, for instance, right? Top priority. I want to get more safe. I'm going to, propose that I take a course, right? I'll execute some training. Okay, I got it. That time comes at a cost, right? When I'm sitting in that training, that means I'm not doing something else. And so what am I going to get for that cost? What do you expect to see? Do you expect to see injuries reduced by what? 25%? 30? 40? Give me your predicted result, okay? And so don't move into execution until you've got all these pieces in place. And then, because we are not an academic institution, we act, right? That blue arrow. And we learn a ton. We operate in the actual environment, right? So we've done our best to predict the environment. Now we're out there in the actual environment. And we execute the plan that we have, and we get an actual result. All right? And so this is when the interesting part and the learning part starts. Okay, what's the next step? Compare, right? So what happened? Right? What were the differences between my expected result and my actual result? And we do some gap analysis or causal analysis, and we resolve that, right? Difference. That's learning. I expected a particular result. I got a different result. What happened? Why the difference? So you can see now the importance of the predicted result before you start. Because without that, there's no basis for gap analysis. You just sort of have a result and you don't know why, and it's hard to learn, okay? And then, what do? We should all be singing this in unison, right? I mean, it was like, what do we do next? Well, we run it again, right? And only now, if you sort of think about increasing knowledge on the y-axis here over time, we're smarter this time. We understand the environment better, and we've made some adjustments to our model because we're out there in the actual environment. And we've adjusted our plan, or maybe we've adjusted our goals because we've done that gap analysis between our predicted result and our actual result. And so now we just run that entire cycle again, okay? All right. This exponential curve, exponential-ish, is kind of descriptive of some of the pace of technology, the potential of technology, right? Performance can now follow this exponential curve in so many areas of our world right now. And we've got about a 10-year time frame along the bottom axis. The entire slide describes 10 years. And you can see that, one acquisition or engineering model is, hey, we define some extremely far-reaching goals, long-term programs. And so, we build and we define specs and we, all of that, and we go and go and go. And sometimes 10 years down the road, we finally have some kind of a prototype or a demo, and we run our first, experiment. And, this is a description of kind of where that might be. You get one learning cycle in 10 years, okay? The difference between, where that might bring you and the potential curve is huge, right? We've got to make sure that, well, that's just missing potential. That's lost potential. And this is the most benign representation of that because this is just us versus potential. It doesn't talk about our competitors and what they're doing, right, and how they're exploiting these forces. And so I would advocate for sort of a shorter learning cycle, an acquisition system that gets out there, experiments faster, learns faster, shorter learning cycles, so that we can adjust faster. This becomes much more habitual, and we can hopefully ride that potential curve much closer and minimize the gap between where we are and our potential. And, if we're really good at it, we can, achieve right there. We can be right on it, okay? All right. Do you think this is possible? We got a lot of people, really smart people in the room. Is this theoretically possible? Yeah, of course it is, right? But we've got to make sure our systems allow us to do that. We've got to drive to this short learning cycle. It doesn't have to be just technology, right? This is a map of the Pacific in World War II, and this was the learning engine that we generated up in Newport, Rhode Island to run through a series of war games to generate War Plan Orange. And we did that. We would go through and we would reach kind of an end, couldn't go any further, we would fail. And so we would go back and we would adjust some things. We would introduce some technologies maybe, right? We learned from this in terms of what technologies would make it better, and then we went back. And so our concepts matured by virtue of this learning cycle. So it's not all technology. In fact, when Admiral Nimitz went out to actually execute the war in the Pacific, he said that when he did that, super complex environment, he was surprised by only one thing. He knew everything he saw he had seen in the war games except one thing. What was that one thing? Thank you, historians, raise your hand. Nicely done. Okay, okay. It's my plant back here, all right? All right, so it doesn't have to be technology. Okay, this is really, we're going to school now, so I'm going to draw a couple axes, performance over time. Here is our exponential curve, okay? And I would describe our performance kind of that way. We're improving, but we're not improving exponentially, okay? Where do you think we are right now? Where would you, if you had to strike a chalk line at 2016, where would that be? Little audience participation. Who? It would be, so the two lines cross. Would it be before or after the two lines have crossed? Who says before? Okay? Optimists in your room, raise your hand. Who says it's after? Yeah, okay. I think we all get the same sense. And so I would say right there. Right? It's just at that point. The gap is, I would say, manageable. If we look at it, take a snapshot, right, without the derivatives, it's manageable. So we can kind of convince ourselves everything's okay right now, but it's going to be unmanageable pretty quick, all right? Oh, by the way, there's our competition. They're improving faster than we are right now, okay? And just as this shows, we are probably just shy of those two lines crossing, but just shy. If we don't improve our pace, that crossing point is going to happen before we know it. So that's what an interesting part of that graph we are living in right now. The challenge could not be more urgent, okay? That's the potential. How do we achieve that potential? It's better than just the raw potential of the technologies, which is kind of on an exponential curve. But when you combine those technologies in new ways, you start to see elements of factorial types of curves come in, right? N factorial, all right? You guys with me? It's early in the day, so I know I'm, and a factorial curve over a few n makes an exponential curve look like a flat line along the x-axis. It's a very powerful curve. So by combining these technologies in new and different ways, we can achieve better than exponential performance. A great example, back in World War II, the home defense system in Britain, right? Pound for pound, kit for kit, the Germans had better radars than the Brits, but the British stitched them all together in a network system and won the Battle of Britain. They combined those technologies in more creative ways. So it can be done. Okay, so I'm right at a few minutes over my allotted time, but with your generosity, I would like to get to some questions. And so I'll just go to my handlers over here. What do you think? Okay, just give me the hook when it's the time. Okay. Admiral Eccles.
So, speaking now after the advantage of a couple of years in industry, I've got a different and better appreciation for what the engine for innovation is. And frequently, for those of us who need to not only do the right thing for the mission, but also entertain a mission that says there's a business imperative too, we've got to find a balance in how we get our incentives aligned. One of those alignment incentive issues is on the very issue of competition, not just for lowest price, but greatest bang for the buck. And so for us, it is often the case that our investment in pursuit of some greater good that follows requires us to achieve an edge over others in our own competitive environment by having an intellectual property that edges those guys. When aligned right, that also goes to meeting the Navy mission because, of course, it takes capability up that curve faster. So the question I have is, how in an environment where we also, for a lot of good reasons, want to share our ideas, how do we avoid the dilution and the leveling of the playing field where incentives like competition over intellectual property needs to be preserved to keep that engine going?
Yeah,
And I'd submit to you that there are times where a safe harbor for that kind of intellectual property protection in the name of advantage for not only the businesses that are innovating, but for the government, is way different from where we have it today. Today we say, bring your good ideas, then we give it out to everybody who didn't invest,
Right.
and then we are surprised by the outcome.
Right. No, I think that's an excellent point. And so as we strike to expand and strengthen these partnerships, particularly with industry, you know, I'm just working with every molecule to have those types of discussions at the strategic level. And, you know, we can find ways to get both done, right? This can be a win-win. And there's plenty to go around for everybody, right? So that, you know, these private sector teams who answer to stockholders and boards and all those things, you know, they've got responsibilities and they're going to be held accountable there. We can do this, right? We've done it before and we can do it again. And certainly, you know, I used to, when we'd walk around and talk, you know, some of the work that we do obviously is highly classified and it's done by private companies. And so they would say, well, you know, if you want to raise the classification of that and the systems, you know, that would, by extension, need to be enhanced, well, you're going to have to pay for that. And I was like, well, you know, I bet you got an intellectual property concern here as well, right? That's just as urgent as any security concern I would have. So I think that there's a lot of overlap there. I think there's an awful lot of room for improvement. And, you know, those are the types of strategic discussions I think we need to have to move this thing forward. But it's a great question. Thank you. Yeah. Over here.
Hi, good morning, sir. Megan Eckstein with U.S. Naval Institute News.
Megan.
Good to see you again. You spoke about the learning cycle that you're pushing. Earlier this week, you signed off on an LCS review team.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering where that fits in with this learning cycle effort, and then also how the changing threat environment may affect how you choose to implement those lessons.
Okay, Megan, if I could just come across the room and give you a hug right now, I would. It's such a great question. You know, I did sign out with Secretary Stackley this review of the littoral combat ship, and I just thought, well, one, it's a brand new class of ship, right? And we're just getting our legs underneath us, just getting water under the keel there, and learning so much. I thought it's the perfect time to sit down and get, you know, smart people and make sure that with everything that we've learned going forward, up to now, and with the challenges going forward, and, you know, the budget has some things to say about that, and we're going to come to kind of one model. We're going to converge on the frigate, and it was time to see what we've learned now, and not be, you know, committed to the original model, right? If we cement that in place, we basically, you know, embargo all of the lessons that we've learned, and we don't incorporate them. So that's exactly the spirit of this review. Is how can we make this program more effective going forward, given what we've learned now and what we've projected in the near future? What does that mean for, you know, the manning, the maintenance, the mission modules, et cetera, for the littoral combat ship? So that's exactly, you know, this is high velocity learning in an LCS context. Thanks. Okay, yeah.
Admiral Tim Oliver. I'm with you, got the sleeves rolled up. Saw the kind of need to do this faster experimentation. The cost issue is, again, I think the driver. And I would just try to emphasize that we had early on an effort to have open architecture with defined interfaces as a driver to allow small black boxes to be tried out rapidly and still have that intellectual property protected. But I don't see all of the community having those kinds of requirements in their platforms. And so I would just raise that issue.
Okay, so let's talk about that because you raised an excellent point. So private industry folks, please raise your hand. Okay, well, okay, good. So let's go back to that conversation that I think we should be having between the government and industry. And I would say get engaged early and at a strategic level. And my sense is that if we describe, hey, here's our best articulation of what we want to do, what we're after. And here's, a couple of ideas in terms of requirements that outline a path forward, a way that we might actually make this happen. And then the next question I think is really key. What do you think? If this is our goal, what do you think? How do you think we could best reach that goal? And I think a lot of you would come back and say, hey, your ideas are pretty good, but let me just tell you something, a couple things you may not be aware of. And if you just thought about it this way, we could bring these technologies to bear, combine them with this thing, and we could reach your goal so much more effectively and efficiently. Would you be willing to give that a try? And then write that into your requirements thing, And I think those are extremely valuable types of conversations that really leverage all of the expertise and talent that's available to us. And so those dialogues are absolutely critical, and we must find a way to have those types of conversations. Okay. I think I've got one more. Sir?
Yes, Doug Post from the Army. I was wondering how your talk consisted of two big pieces, one about exponential growth in IT and one about the requirement for exponential improvement in acquisition. How can you marry those? How can you use the exponential growth in IT power to produce an exponential growth in acquisition capability?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, I would say that if I could just adjust your articulation of my thesis, it's exponential growth not only in IT, but almost everywhere, right? So it's easy for us to think of IT because Moore's Law, kind of defined it to be exponential. And that's kind of Moore's edict, right? That's what he said, we're going to double every 18 months, and that's the way we're going to stay competitive. And so far, it's worked out. There's been some recent articles that, that we might be at the end of Moore's Law. I'm sure you've read them. We'll see. But to your point, we're trying to do this, in our headquarters staffs, for instance, right? I would argue that we're locked into models that have not really leveraged some of these information technologies to the best effect. At the very macro scale, I think that what you're saying is, we could get technology to do the job that a lot of people would do. It would do it faster, allow us to be more agile in acquisition as well, with fewer people, right? We've got machines that can do things that people used to do in terms of decisions, I guess, and we maybe not be leveraging that advantage. And so I agree with you 100%. In fact, I think that going forward, one of the questions that I've got, you saw that Google car, right? Well, it's not too much longer. We're going to have Google Truck and, Google Train and, that sort of thing. And it may not be Google. It'll just be driverless vehicles. So what do we do with all the drivers? Right? If we're not thinking through those types of questions, we're just going to have a lot of drivers that are going to not have jobs. And substitute sailor for driver, and you've got my challenge. So I need your help there. Okay? Thanks very much. Okay, everybody, sleeves back down now and jackets back on. Thank you. I was never here.
Thank you, CNO. That was a wonderful keynote. Don't leave. We're give us a few minutes, and the PEO panel is getting ready to set up. Thank you very much.